So, Ngozi, you mentioned about your Catholic background.
Yes.
So, where was the turning point when you realized about what you mentioned earlier, that you were deprived of this information regarding your sexuality and reproductive rights?
Okay, I think, the church, there are certain things you're not supposed to speak about. There are certain things your parents don't speak to you about, especially if they are not too educated. There are some areas that they're supposed to be silent. And at times we take it for granted. At times they don't speak about it, not because they don't want to, but they don't even have the information. So I grew up in a family where we had 4 boys first, and then I came, and then my junior sister, and I didn't have any information about anything that has to do with sexuality, So as I was growing up, I was grappling with information, and then there were always Bible quotations to back up the fact that you can't have sexuality information means you begin to experiment with sex, So I grew up in that kind of home, and then my brothers were also rigid, and then it was like, who are you playing with, who is your friend, we need to know, all kinds of things. So I grew up being in my closet, being so quiet. But as I began to grow up, I found out that young people around me want to confide in me, they want to tell me some things about their life, and then they will come to me and say, oh, do you know anything about this, and I was like, if I'm doing this, I need to find a better way of doing it, and I didn't have that awareness until I joined BAOBAB, and I'm like, how can I kind of institutionalize this information I give to young people? So I seized the opportunity. I did a proposal, and MacArthur funded it. I left BAOBAB for 2 years, did this research in the church. It wasn't very easy, but I had to look for an entry point. I found a reverend father who was quite progressive, and he gave me opportunity to do the research in the church. And then I talked to young persons. What do you know about your body? What do you know about your self-esteem, And then we began talking.
Wow.
Yeah, we did this for 2 years.
How old were you then?
I was like 20. I was 20 already.
Yeah.
I grew up. I was in the university. I didn't know anything.
Oh my gosh.
I was so naive, and then I was so isolated. I was always on my own, doing my own things, I was really, really timid, and I think it had a lot to do with the instructions and the things that you are told in church. Women don't. Men most of the time in Africa don't give information. It's normally the women.
Yeah.
And if a woman doesn't have the information, she can't really tell you. The highest she can tell you is abstain from sex. Don't look at boys. If you look at them, you'll become pregnant. And that's not information. It doesn't serve any purpose. So that's how I got interested, and then felt I should do something to help younger ones.
So you think things have improved since the time that you became aware about these issues of women's sexuality, reproductive health, reproductive rights? You think that things have improved, or is it there's still a lot of challenges going on?
Yeah, I think things have improved. We have many organizations in Nigeria now doing sexuality education. A number of them doing good work. For instance, we have Action Health. We have Increase, that even works for the rights of LGBT groups in Nigeria. So things have really improved, but it's still work in progress. We are a country of 140 million persons. Information is still trickling down, but we still need to continue to do the work.
Yeah.
And we have activists also, like the young people I did research with, about 20 of them.
Yeah.
They now belong to BAOBAB Network. They are now passing on the information to other younger persons, and that way the message gets.
I believe that BAOBAB in itself is a very diverse organization. You have Muslim women working side by side with Christian women like yourselves.
Exactly.
So how do you engage with each other with regards to issues around women's sexuality?
Yeah. Okay, we approach issues of sexuality in Nigeria and in BAOBAB from the point of view of the fact that, first of all, we are women.
Great.
Before we talk about our differences, our sexualities. So then what we do is that when we talk about sexuality issues and we're speaking to Christian women and girls, somebody like me steps in, and then when we are speaking to Muslim women and girls, a Muslim person steps in. So then it's not as if you are talking to people about what you don't know about. You are talking to them about your realities, about what an experience you have lived, and so they better understand it and appreciate it than someone. Because if I'm to go to begin to quote Quran and talk to, they won't accept my message. They will think I don't know what they are talking about. So that's how we make our work acceptable in Nigeria across the religions.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I was not brought up in a Catholic tradition. I was brought up in a Protestant tradition. I didn't have that experience of my sexuality being repressed, or that I was forbidden by my parents that you can't do this, you can't do that. However, because sexuality is such a taboo subject, or was a taboo subject during that time. Although I was brought up in a relatively liberal environment, I also wasn't taught, just like with you. And it was more of a self-discovery too on my part. And I think that in hindsight, the ideal situation would be that there will be no such control and regulation of who I am as a woman, but I think that it has to be accompanied also by availability of information, as what you've done with young women in Nigeria. And so, you know, as what you've also done in your country, I also made it a point that, you know, starting with home, with my daughter and nieces, I also try to make information available as soon as they're able to understand these issues around women's sexuality and reproductive health.
Yes.
Okay.
That's really interesting. And then I'm so glad now that we're working together at a global level. Now both of us are involved in the MDG3 project of Women Living Under Muslim Laws and Institute for Women's Empowerment. It's a good thing. And we've been sharing ideas and strategies. And then I believe that the lessons we've learned here is going to help us in our project with Women Living Under Muslim Laws and Institute for Women's Empowerment.
Yeah.
And then after that, I hope, because we already have work in this regard, we're not just going to stop after the first 3 years. We're going to carry it forward, you know.
But because the focus of our conversation this past 4 days had been about women human rights defenders, just to go back a little bit on the work that you're doing in Nigeria, did you encounter any situations whereby women who was doing similar work like yourselves had been harassed, had been repressed by members of their communities? Because that was really the topic of our discussion, that in all of these issues around the role of culture, religion, you know, and cultural forces on women's rights, there are particular impact on women human rights defenders. Have you encountered those kind of situations of women who had been intimidated, harassed, or even pushed, you know, out of their community?
Of course. We have stories of women who have had to flee the country. We had someone who is a member of BAOBAB's board. She had to leave the country at some point. Urgent Action Fund funded her to leave the country. And also we have other things that might not be physical, but psychological abuses that we face. For instance, you receive calls and then people threaten your life and want to know why you're doing this kind of work. And then, like I said, when we were doing the group work, there are persons representing LGBT groups. If they have misfortune, which is part of life, it is attributed to the work, to the dirty work that they are doing, and this is why they are having misfortune in this area. So there are many ways that women's human rights defenders are being abused. Some are not accepted in certain circles, you know, and called all kinds of names. So it's
It's the same thing in my country.
Begin to withdraw, you know, from the work that they do, or deny in public that they don't do this work.
It's the same thing in my country. I mean, the Catholic Church particularly had been very explicit in terms of their name calling of women who are at the forefront of their advocacy for, let's say, exercising their choice with regards to whether or not and when to have children. So they're like, they have been lumped together and labeled as sinful women or playing into the hands of the devil.
Exactly.
So they get stigmatized, not in the most brutal forms of intimidation as we have known in other countries, but nonetheless the effects are the same. Thank you very much, Ngozi. It was very nice.